A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers and those who are listening via Second Advent Radio. We're delighted to have you with us on today's Let's Talk. Today is a special day in the Seventh Adventist churches around the world. Today's Let's Talk. I do believe I have a device running Seventh Adventist church. Yes. So I was saying, sorry about that little feedback that you may have experienced just now, but today is a special day in the Seventh Adventist churches. On the calendar, we call it Religious Liberty Day. As a church, we believe in promoting certain freedoms or certain rights that we consider to be important. And we will get into the details as to what we really mean about religious liberty. In fact, I won't have to do that alone. I have three very capable individuals who will assist me on this program this afternoon as we discuss matters pertaining to Sabbath observance and religious liberty. Before we go into that discourse, however, as usual, we invite you to bow your heads as we pray. Father, we ask for your wisdom and your guidance. We pray that you will be with us as we go into our discourse for this afternoon. We pray that you will strengthen and sustain us and help us as we discuss, as we share issues, as we answer questions that our viewers may have, that you will give wisdom to our guests so that they will be able to clarify issues and give us all a better understanding of these important principles. Thank you for hearing and for guiding us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, friends, as indicated, we have a panel of three distinguished individuals who will be guiding us through some issues, some principles, some ideas relating to the subject of religious liberty. We are going to be talking to the issue of this often discussed matter of what we generally refer to in these parts as essential services. We're going to be talking about issues relating to career choices and the Sabbath and religious liberty. So let me go into introductions of our distinguished panel. I want to begin with what we like to say, the rose among the thorns. And so I will just highlight here for you a beautiful young lady from the United States Virgin Islands. Her name is Natasha Baker. She's an attorney from St. Thomas. Attorney Baker currently works as a federal prosecutor at the United States Attorney's Office for the District of the Virgin Islands. Prior to this, she worked as an assistant attorney general with the Virgin Islands Attorney General's Office, where she serves as a prosecutor and the director of domestic violence and sexual assault units. She has worked as a legal advisor or clerk to 4 judges and a Virgin Islands Supreme Court justice. She obtained a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Political Science from Morgan State University, magna cum laude, a Juris Doctorate from Harvard University School of Law, and a legal education certificate from Hugh Wooding Law School in Trinidad. Attorney Baker is the Vice President of Administration for the Caribbean Union Religious Liberty Association. We use the acronym CARLA. She attends the Philadelphia Seventh Adventist Church in St. Thomas, where she serves as the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director. Additionally, she serves the church in other areas, including school board, conference, board of education, conference, constitution committee, etc. She has conducted several presentations in the area of religious liberty and sexual assault and domestic violence. So the next time I have a discussion in that area, I know exactly who I can call on. We are delighted to have you with us this afternoon, Attorney Baker. Welcome to Let's Talk. I do understand you listen to the program from time to time, so we're delighted to have you featuring this afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you, Pastor Greene.
All right, you may just say a word of greetings to those folks who are listening. I believe we have a few regular listeners from St. Thomas, and so just a shout out to some of the folks.
Happy Sabbath to everyone who's listening. I am excited for this engaging conversation. I hope that we all learn a thing or two, and it would empower us to be better employees and, of course, better Sabbath keepers as we move forward in this vineyard.
All right, next we are going to introduce Attorney Loy Weste. Attorney Loy Weste is from Antigua. He is an attorney at law and notary public, having been called to the bar of Antigua and Barbuda in 2007. He read law at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Bridgetown, Barbados, from 2001 to 2004. Graduating with a Bachelor of Law degree with honors. From 2005 to 2007, he attended the Norman Manley Law School in Kingston, Jamaica, where he completed his legal education certificate, thereby allowing him to of course, practice in all English-speaking Caribbean regions. Elder Weste met and married his wife, Lisa John Weste, who is a partner in the law firm Thomas John and Company. He is the business law lecturer at the University of the West Indies, the Five Islands campus here in Antigua, and a law lecturer at the University of the West Indies Open Campus. He also lectures several law courses offered by the University of the Southern Caribbean, the Antigua campus. He has been a member of the St. John's Seventh Adventist Church since 2007. He, as I indicated earlier on, was married to Lisa John Weste, and they both attend the St. John's Seventh Adventist Church. He is actively involved in that congregation. He serves there as family life director, Sabbath school superintendent, men's ministries leader, assistant area coordinator, etc. Very involved, and we are delighted to have Attorney Weste with us this afternoon. Elder Weste, good afternoon. Welcome to Let's Talk, and just a word of greeting to those who are viewing.
Good afternoon, Dr. Greene. Good afternoon to my distinguished panelists as well, and to those who are listening and viewing. It's a pleasure to be here. Happy Sabbath to everyone. And I am really looking forward to this discussion. It's an area, even this afternoon when I was taking home a couple of members of our church, the discussion just happened to roll into the matter of religious liberty and decisions that they had to take. So I know that this is an area that members of the church and individuals want to be heard and want to know what the church's advice and position is. And I'm sure this will be an engaging conversation for everyone. Thanks so much.
Most happy to have you with us. Now, the third and final panelist is a young man who is very distinguished in that he wears several hats. He is, I always have to take my time when I call his name. He is Pastor Attorney Dr. Gangalal Samlalsingh. All right, so maybe you need to practice that. Gangalal Samlalsingh. Okay, we are delighted to have Dr. Samlalsingh, Attorney Samlalsingh. You know, every now and then we come across an individual who is both a pastor and an attorney. And so this afternoon, he is going to give us that pastoral perspective. He currently serves the Caribbean Union as the stewardship director. He is from Trinidad and Tobago. He is not so forthcoming with his details in terms of where he studied and all the rest of it. But he wants to let you know that he loves the Lord. He is passionate about Christianity. He's passionate about legal matters. I overheard a conversation with him. He didn't know I was eavesdropping, but I overheard a conversation with him and somebody else recently, and he was saying, whenever the time comes for retirement, he already has plans to just go into his legal practice. So he has a plan for his retirement there. We are delighted to have you with us, Dr. Samlalsingh. Good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Greene, for your warm greetings and introduction. Good afternoon to my two distinguished colleagues on the panel. It's a privilege to be with you this afternoon as we discuss the issue of religious liberty and other matters in relation to our Christian experience. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Wonderful. So thank you so much all for joining us. Now, we want to get into this discussion, and to all of our viewers around the world, we have viewers who listen regularly from throughout the Caribbean, North America, in Europe. I want to say a special good afternoon to a person who took the time to say, I'm going to be listening this afternoon from the United Kingdom. So it's a delight to have you with us. I'm just now remembering that we were discussing the other day a matter relating to religious liberty. And I probably should have sent a special message to tell you that you needed to hear this program this afternoon, but you did say that you're going to be on. So wherever you are, whether you're in Jamaica, whether you're in Trinidad, whether you're in California, whether you are in New York, whether you're in Colombia, South America, whether you are in Antigua, or whether you're listening on Second Advent, maybe you're driving in your vehicle, you're streaming somewhere, Second Advent around the world. If you're listening on SLC Adventist or SLC Church channel, or you're listening on Facebook, welcome to Let's Talk. We're going to get into our discussion at this moment. I want to begin this way. Of course, I did say that it is Religious Liberty Day. The emphasis around the world is on religious liberty. As Seventh-day Adventists, the concept of religious liberty is an important one, as the Bible makes clear that it will become a major issue in last-day events. We see hints to this in the historical section of the book of Daniel, where true worship is forbidden and false worship is enforced. Today, we want to explore some concepts of religious liberty and the Seventh-day Adventist Christian. We want to especially look at such areas as the constitutional provision for freedom of worship, the challenge of changing one's religious convictions while under a particular employment contract, the limits and implications of essential services, and challenging careers with respect to Sabbath observance. So maybe it's good to say that Seventh Adventists believe, I want to begin this way, Seventh Adventists believe that the Bible is the word of God and that members are to live in obedience to the dictates of the Bible. As such, we believe, among other things, that the observance of the seventh-day Sabbath is binding on all mankind. This fact has proved problematic, though, for many Seventh Adventists, especially individuals who, after a crusade, decide that they want to become members of the Seventh Adventist Church, and they encounter issues with Saturday. Saturday is considered a regular work day around the world. And so let's ask you, distinguished panelists, about the provision for freedom of conscience as stipulated by the United Nations Conventions and the implication for what you may want to say the freedom of religion, the freedom of worship as enshrined in many of the constitutions across the region. What rights does the Constitution give its citizens in terms of freedom of religion and worship? Go ahead, Attorney Baker.
Yes, Dr. Greene. Well, one of the overarching documents that most countries turn to when we talk about freedom of religion and conscience, we talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the most often quoted provision of that is Article 18. And just not to reinvent the wheel, I will read exactly what it says. And it says, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in practice, worship, and observance. So that particular provision is where a lot of countries turn to determine how they would fashion their own constitutions as it relates to various freedoms, because that's not the only freedom that is noted in the Declaration, but as it relates to freedom of religion, that is kind of like the benchmark. And you would find in a lot of the constitutions across the Caribbean, the language in terms of freedom of religion is similar. And the United States Constitution, for example, is very straightforward with that the United States or the government should not create a law that prohibits freedom to exercise or establish any particular religion. So that basically says that the United States government cannot have a religion as part of its government structure. And likewise, it can prohibit whatever religion from practicing, or any individual from practicing their religion. And you would find, like, even in the BVI Constitution, you have a similar wording. But what's interesting, for example, about the BVI Constitution is that in parts of like their preamble, they say outright that their constitutional framework is with the understanding that their culture is around certain moral and religious thought processes, and that they explicitly believe in God. Now, you wouldn't find that in the United States Constitution, but it's part of what individual countries can do. They can establish, what framework they want to work with in terms of freedom of religion. But for the most part, they all state that, individuals have the right to freedom of religious practice. And if I was to get a little bit more specific, in the USVI, we actually have a statute in our laws, not necessarily our Constitution, because our Constitution is basically the United States Constitution, or what we call the Organic Act. But we have laws that state that, specifically to Sabbath, that persons or employers should not discriminate against anyone in their observance of Sabbath specifically. We have that in our laws. So, different regions, I'm sure, have similar provisions.
That's interesting, and we're going to come to that in a while. I thank you. You said a mouthful there, but let's go to Antigua. Elder West, you have been on Let's Talk before. We discussed not quite the same subject, but in terms of Attorney Baker referenced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights there, and I thought that was interesting. I believe the Constitution in Antigua Barbuda reflects some of that. Can you just give a little bit there?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Greene. Definitely, the Constitution of Antigua and Barbuda does reflect the right of freedom of religion under our fundamental rights, which is contained in our Constitution. It indicates that every individual has the right to freedom of conscience, and the right to freedom of conscience, which is the fundamental right, fundamental human right, also includes the right to choose your own religion, the right to change your religion without discrimination. So essentially, a lot of what Counsel Baker would have indicated applies within our Constitution and applies to the employer-employee relationship in Antigua and Barbuda. So that if there's an individual who makes a determination that they have decided to become a Seventh-day Adventist and they have changed from a different denomination to a Seventh-day Adventist, to the Seventh-day Adventist religion, then they are entitled to do so in Antigua and Barbuda, and they are protected such that they can observe the Sabbath. Now, what we have to always bear in mind, and I'm sure we'll discuss this as we go further, is that in Antigua and Barbuda and in many other countries, the enforcement of such constitutional right is a right that is enforced and enforceable against the government. And so that is a fundamental right that you have, that the government cannot take away your right not to be forced to work on the Sabbath because you've chosen a particular religion or because you have changed your religion. No, the labor code, as well Ms. Baker would have referred to as well, our Antigua and Barbuda labor code also enshrines within it the right not to be discriminated against because of your religious denomination as well. So yes, it is in our constitution as a fundamental right, and the labor code actually seeks to protect individuals, but it does not go so far as the progressive law that Ms. Baker would have identified as to specifically state that you are protected from being forced to work on the Sabbath, but it does protect you from discrimination. And so in civil, when I speak to civil, the relationship between an employer and employee, if the individual is not working for the government, then you still have that protection not to be discriminated against. But in this case, the question of reasonableness does come to the fore, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more later.
That's very interesting. I'm tempted to jump right into asking a few things based on what you and Attorney Baker said there, but I want to get the perspective from Attorney Pastor Samlalsingh, and particularly because you work in a country that is multi-religious, you may want to say, multicultural. In Trinidad and Tobago, you have a very good mix of Hindus and Muslims and Christians. So let's hear from you. How does this work there? Antigua, we do have some Muslims here. We do have a sprinkling of maybe people from other nationalities, but it is safe to say that the predominant religious perspective here is Christian. But in Trinidad and Tobago, I know you have almost equal sharing of the pot, so to speak. So let's hear you, Dr. Samlalsingh.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. And of course, I appreciate the contribution from counsel on the panel. Trinidad and Tobago is multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and it's a really complicated situation because while we have a constitution in Trinidad and Tobago, we are discovering now in our present situation that sometimes the very constitution is violated and certain rights that are enshrined in the constitution is trampled upon. So, especially in light of the recent pandemic, but as it relates to freedom of religion, our constitution provides for protection for all citizens. They have the right to freedom of conscience and religion or religious beliefs and observance. It does not specifically state the Sabbath or any other observance or days, as the case may be, as it relates to the different religious bodies, but it does state that, there is that freedom of religious belief and observance, so that every religious body has that right to adhere to its beliefs and its practices, providing that it does not, violate those said rights and beliefs that other religious bodies are allowed provision for in the Constitution. But it's really complicated here, because one of the issues, for example, that came up recently in relation to the pandemic and the COVID-19 experience, the government made a decision to not to allow the Hindu religious body to have open pyre, cremation. And of course, they had to double back on that, because there were a few attorneys who were preparing to challenge it before the court, and before it got there to some extent, and the government decided against it. So, and that of course has to do with a practice of the Hindu religion. Having come from a Hindu background, quite a wide cross-section of Hindus in Trinidad and Tobago, when their loved ones die, they have that facility. And it has to do with the belief that they have, because the Constitution states clearly that their freedom of conscience and religious beliefs are protected. And of course, that's one of the beliefs in the Hindu religion, that when they have open pyre cremation, that the soul leaves the body. Of course, we know that that's not biblically true, but to the Hindus, that's what they believe. It leaves the body and returns to its original place, as the case may be. So it was in that direction that some of the attorneys who I spoke with personally were planning to put the argument before the court.
Now I see that this is getting very exciting here, because we already see questions coming in. But before we go to that, Dr. Samlalsingh, you're raising an issue there that is of particular interest to me in terms of the practice of one's religion. And because we're talking about religious liberty here, sometimes one particular religious persuasion may have a practice that another religious body deems offensive or dislikes for some reason or the other, and how do we deal with the issue of tolerance. But let's swing back to the matter of the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. Now, you said something, Attorney Baker. You said that there is a law in the United States that sort of specifically mentions Sabbath. I thought I heard you correctly. That kind of gives protection for individuals. Now I'm watching my clock because it's almost 3:30 already, which means we only have half an hour to go. But I'm going to say publicly, I'm inviting all of you to continue this discussion next week, because I know we're not going to finish it this week, and I hope you are able to make it. But if the Constitution stipulates that I have the rights to change my religion, or to observe and to practice my beliefs, and I suppose that also includes not believing in any God or any religion, how is it that we have the challenge of the issues relating to Sabbath so often in the Caribbean, with individuals who are working and their bosses say no, they can't get Saturdays off? If it's a constitutional provision, why is it a challenge? Maybe there is something deeper down that your attorneys need to speak to. So share that with me. And
well,
and Attorney Baker, while you're at the mic, you mentioned that Sabbath law issue kind of thing there that is in St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands. How does that work? Likewise.
Okay, so let me start with that. So it's not a United States law, it's specific to the Virgin Islands. It's within the Virgin Islands Code. And it says it shall be an unlawful discriminatory discriminatory practice for any employer to prohibit, prevent, or disqualify any person from, or otherwise to discriminate against any person in obtaining or holding employment because of his observance of any particular day or days or any portion thereof as a Sabbath or holy day in accordance with the requirements of his religion. So that's what it states, and that's specific to the Virgin Islands Code. And just understanding how legislation, and particularly here in the Virgin Islands, work, I'm sure that at one particular time, someone had an issue to this extent and reached out to one of the legislators, and this became a bill drafted and became law. But this is not a constitutional provision. This is just this is part of the Virgin Islands code specifically. So this does not apply to the United States overall. But to the second aspect of what you were speaking on, which is, well, why is this an issue if we have these laws? And that's essentially why we have attorneys, because many employers don't know the laws. That's the first thing. Things only usually come to light when an issue comes up or when someone makes a grievance, and then is where the laws come into play. And that is why it's important for us as attorneys, pastors, for us to know what the law is so that we can properly advise members as to what their rights are when these situations come up. And particularly new believers, because if they've never observed Sabbath before, they won't have a clue what laws are respecting, Sabbath observance, particularly since those who observe Sabbath are typically in a minority when it comes to employment. So this will continue to be an issue. One reason, because employers just are not aware. Secondly, and this will go into what Attorney West was kind of hinting to, there are gonna be employers who believe that even if you have a Sabbath observance based on what my company is or what we do, we can't afford for you to observe Sabbath because, we need you for whatever reason. And that's where you get into the technicalities of where you have exceptions. What does that mean? What is determined to be like an essential service? That sort of thing. And then another reason could simply be that they're going to say, well, when we hired you on the premise that you're not a Sabbath observer. And we entered into a contract with you and you said that you can work these days. And it's unfair to us now for you to say that you're switching and now you're going to say you're not going to work on this specific day. So I think those are some reasons, and there may be others, why this continues to be an issue and probably will in the future as I think society, people, members get to learn more about what their rights are as it relates to Sabbath observance.
So Attorney West, I see you shaking your head. So I take it that you're both in agreement and maybe want to add something else. I am a Seventh-day Adventist. I am working for this company. Well, I am not necessarily careful to practice my religion, and so I go out and I work on Saturdays. But then I'm listening to a sermon. These days, a lot of sermons are being preached on YouTube and Facebook and that kind of thing, especially because of the pandemic, the closures and so on. And I get convicted that I should straighten up. I should get serious about my religious persuasion. And I go to my boss and said, listen, boss, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I really should not have been working on Saturdays. I can't work on Saturdays any longer. And the boss says, sorry, you should have known that from the start. So how do I deal with that?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Dr. Greene. The reality is that there are many persons who are faced with that situation. No, we go back to our reliance on the constitutional provisions and also the provisions in the Antigua and Barbuda Labor Code for employees faced with that dilemma in Antigua. An employee does have a right to change persuasion or to enforce their religious belief. But as Council Baker rightly indicated, and as I would have alluded to before, it is a question, especially for private employment, it is a question of the reasonableness. I recall, I believe in a conversation with you, Dr. Greene, in an earlier discussion, there may be an employee that provides a particular service, and that employee who wants to observe Sabbath is particularly skilled in that area, and there's no other employee within that organization that can provide that service. Let us say, for instance, I think our discussion led to Barbuda and have one person providing making sure that the utilities were provided for the entire country. And so then there is that issue. If that individual isn't there, then the organization itself may not be run at all. And so then there is the question of whether it is reasonable for the employer who says, I need you within this organization to continue to work on Sabbath. There is also a situation where the employer may be able to roster you so that you don't have to work on the Sabbath. And so these are all considerations that one may have. If it is that the employer, the organization is one of 200 individuals, and your skill is one that many other employees have, then it is reasonable for you to say whether or not you had not been observing the Sabbath, even though you were Seventh-day Adventist during the time when you were engaged. You still are entitled under the law to go to the employer and say, listen, there are a number of ways in which my contract relationship with you can be organized so that I can be rostered, that I don't have to work on the Sabbath. And if it is that the employer is not being reasonable in adhering to such a request not to have you scheduled to work on the Sabbath, then you have recourse to pursuing the matter at the Labor Department and ultimately within the courts in order to enforce your right to religious liberty, your right to choose not to work on the Sabbath.
Attorney Samlalsingh, before you add anything you wish to that, there is a question here that I want you to respond to. Someone is asking, how does the law define religion? Does it have to be formal with written dogmas or doctrines?
Yes, Dr. Greene. There is what we refer to as organized religious bodies that are registered in Trinidad and Tobago. Those organized, registered religious bodies have, to some extent, more weight than let's say, the splinter groups that may be organized. Just someone come up with some beliefs or whatever, and just decide to form a religious organization. So in Trinidad, more credence is given to those bodies that are registered, not saying that the law would not, or the court would not recognize other persons who may have religious belief of a certain persuasion.
All right, I don't know if anybody wants to say anything on that in terms of whether religion has to be organized or loose.
Well, in the US, one of the terms that we use in courts to determine, kind of like define religion is we look to whether the person has like a sincerely held religious belief. And when in the US, what happens is the court generally, if someone says, yes, this is my sincerely held religious belief, the court will generally accept that. But the employer, for example, has an opportunity to rebut it with evidence that it's not the person's sincerely held religious belief based on whatever external evidence. Like, for example, since Corona, a lot of persons have now been identifying with the Rastafarian religion because they have been getting exemption in terms of being able to take the vaccine. But one of the, I guess, characteristics of the Rastafarian religion is that they have locks. And you have persons who, or other little, aspects, and you have persons who may not have that. And so an employer may use that as a reason to say, no, you're not, or, I don't see you in a certain place, worshiping with the Rastafarians. But technically the court will accept that you have, especially if you can prove it. So along with what Attorney Samlalsingh said, if you're part of an organized religion, you have an easier time essentially proving that this is your sincerely held religious belief. Because all you need to pull out if you're Adventist is our fundamental beliefs or the Bible and prove your point. But if it's some offshoot religion that, it might be a harder task to prove that this is sincere.
So let's go back now to this discussion with the whole matter of getting my Saturdays to worship. We may have two categories of individuals. You may have a situation where a company that originally operated 5 days a week. I share my own experience. Before I went into ministry, I worked at a bank. The regular work week was 5 days, but at one time when business was getting very hectic and they needed to do some extra work, my boss sent a note to say that I was required to come in on Saturdays to do extra work. And that presented a challenge, I suppose. Now, of course, I was a young employee. I was more concerned about, what, am I going to get fired so early in my career? But here you had a company that was changing your work requirements, so to speak. I guess that's easier to fight than a situation where you used to, or as Attorney West said, you signed a legal contract that you are going to be working, whether it be 5 days a week, weekends, or whatever the case may be. And then you approach your boss and say, for whatever reason, I can't do this any longer. I want to think that these are two different scenarios and can produce or provide two different levels of difficulty in terms of getting the issue resolved. I need to go ahead, Elder Loy.
Yeah. Thanks. I'll jump right in. I agree, Dr. Greene. It does present two separate difficulties, two separate challenges. What you'd recognize is that if you are involved, if you have already been engaged and your employment contract reflects that you are only required to work Monday to Friday and you are not required to work on the weekends or on Sabbath, then you have a much stronger and much easier situation in fighting or challenging the decision of your employer to request you to work on the Sabbath. Because once you have an employment contract and there is a change being inserted in your employment contract, then what the law says is that any alteration in your employment contract is one that should be done with the agreement of both parties. So if your employer is insisting now that you must change to work on the Sabbath, whereas before there was no such requirement, then you have an easier argument and an easier path to victory in the courts in establishing that you were already Seventh-day Adventist. That was not a requirement under your contract of employment, and so you are requesting to be exempted. There is, I guess, a greater challenge, I would say, if it is that you were already working on the Sabbath and then you wish to request an alteration to your contract. And the reality is that that does not mean that you will not be successful, but it is a situation where now you have to look at the reasonableness of the employer relationship You have to look at the circumstances under which you were employed. And the reality is that you may end up in a situation, and it could be in both situations really, but it is more likely in the second of the two scenarios that you may end up in a situation where your boss may say, listen, when I engaged you, there was this possibility that you had to work on the Sabbath. You had already been working on the Sabbath. There is no opportunity for me to alter the employment contract because I need you. There's nobody else that can do this job that I require for you to do on the Sabbath. I am not in a position to change without detriment to my institution and my organization. And so it's not that I'm unwilling to do so, but if I do so, you may bankrupt my organization. And in such circumstances, then it may be reasonable for an employer to say, I cannot change. And you may be required to part ways with your employer. And of course, if that is the situation, then the issue of severance of the relationship for your years of service may also arise.
Now, you all are attorneys. I'm a pastor. I preach the word. I talk about justice. I talk about grace and forgiveness and, commitment to God and that kind of thing. But I'm here thinking that should the Constitution contradict an employment contract? Now, if the Constitution, I'm just trying to resolve something in my mind. If the Constitution says that I have the freedom to change my religion, and I change my religion from one that says I don't have to worry about which day I work to one that says I cannot work on this particular day because this day is sacred. For the Seventh Adventists, it may be the Saturday. For somebody else, it may be Sunday. For some other religion, it may be Friday, as the case may be. Now, I had a contract that says I'm going to work on this particular day before, but now the Constitution allows me to change my religion. I'm trying to reconcile the constitutional provision with the employment contract. I don't know who wants to help me out there. If you see maybe from a legal perspective, you don't see any challenge there, but I'm trying to reconcile how they could be a conflict.
I think that the true conflict is really within the employment in of itself. So the employee versus an employer. But I think because of constitutional provisions, the employee should feel comfortable in challenging the stance of the employer, even if they entered into a contract before. Because the constitutional provisions, basically, as you rightly say, Dr. Greene, that you can change your religion. And I think this is the context that we usually encounter with, when we have a crusade and someone gets baptized, and they were working on Sabbaths and now they want that day off. And there's usually a fight. And I think for the employer, they seem to have the upper hand because of one, contracts, because of two, they are the employer, they have the power to pay. So it's like, I can kind of say what I want. But I think that employees should feel empowered to fight for their religious beliefs. And they're not all circumstances that they will be or can be successful. And I think Attorney West highlighted some of those circumstances. But even if an employee presents those arguments, it shouldn't be where the employer or employee, just gives up and say, okay, well, the employer wins. I'm just gonna, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna quit my job or whatever. Or maybe that's a circumstance that they may decide to do. But I think you're right, Dr. Greene, that once the Constitution empowers you to be able to change your religious belief if you so choose, that is essentially the weapon that you're going with to your employer to kind of rally for your religious belief. Now, I just want to put a little plug here, just based on my experience with some of these issues. it's a lot easier to make these types of arguments if you're a good employee. If you have been faithful to this employer, you are good, you generally practice Christian principles, even if you were not Christian before on the job site, then this employer will not want to use you and lose you. They would do whatever they can to keep you, even if it means granting you your Sabbath request. So I mean, I'm not saying that that's the end all be all to fighting, but I'm saying it's a lot easier when you are a good employee.
That's a very interesting point you're raising there. I've heard of cases where individuals say, in fact, I've had employers say to me personally, you know, I'm going to do this for this particular individual because this particular individual is a good worker. They represent the church well, and I'm willing to do this for them. But I've also had the opposite said, you know, these are the most troublesome people. And that's a little embarrassing, to be honest. But now, Dr. Samlalsingh, I want to ask you a question here. I'm hoping we can get to a couple other issues before we finish here. But when Attorney West spoke earlier, he mentioned the issue of reasonableness, you know, and he made a reference to a case where you have a situation where an individual is the only person who can perform a certain duty. I had 3 situations I can make reference to. On a particular island where I did an evangelistic campaign, there was a gentleman who was the only person in the control tower at the airport. So if any plane was going to land, he needed to be there. Is it reasonable for him to say, sorry, no planes can land on Sabbaths, I'm not going to work? I had another situation where there was a power plant. This was on the sister island of Barbuda back in 2007, I think it was. 1997, in fact, that's a while now, 1997, where again, I was doing an evangelistic campaign, and there was somebody who was working at the power plant, and in fact, 2 workers at the power plant, and both wanted to get baptized, and they were the only 2. And the question was, listen, we can't leave the plant unattended on Saturdays. There's nobody else there at the plant. If something goes wrong, electricity goes out on the entire island. The matter of reasonableness, and you know, we can add to that because I'm sure that people can come up with all sorts of other examples. But how do we relate to reasonableness with the commandment of God? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, versus some employers like to say, they like to say, this is a situation of the ass in the hole. You need to pull it out. And some people say, oh, ask your pastor for some dispensation, you know, as though we can give dispensation. But speak to that issue quickly for me, Pastor Samlalsingh.
Yes. Well, as Council West has said, the issue of reasonableness is what the court will consider. But I think also the court will consider the nature of the job, you understand, and the circumstances surrounding that whole issue of the nature of the job. So in the case of one person having that specific responsibility, and it is of such that the court may deem it as necessary, you know, it could be very, very challenging there. One never knows exactly how a court will, you know, treat with these matters. It all has to do with all of the circumstances and facts in relation to that matter. So if I can give a simple experience that I had when some years ago, when I was doing my Masters of Law at the University in Public Law, I recall that after we had finished the coursework and it was time to prepare the thesis, the professor made appointments on a Sabbath. for us to engage him and discuss what we were to do. And I indicated to him that I am a Seventh-day Adventist. I am a Seventh-day Adventist minister, and under no circumstances I would attend any meeting, and so on and so on. And I said I made that abundantly clear when I made my application. So I did not show up. And I also indicated to him that I am fully aware what the provisions are in the Constitution as it relates to my religious beliefs and observances and so on. It so happened that the said professor died not too long after, because I had to pray about it, because I wanted to finish my master's degree. I'm not saying I am not saying that because I prayed, I did not pray for him to die, but I prayed that God will open a way, and the way was open in that regard. So someone else came on, and so it could be very, very challenging, and one never knows how the court will rule. But as Counsel Baker has said, it's worth the effort in going to the court and presenting the circumstances or the facts in relation to the person and the provisions of the Constitution. But of course, as Counsel West has said, the court will look at the whole issue of reasonableness, and reasonableness here would apply to both the employer and the employee. It would not be on one side, it will be on both sides.
Now, it seems to me as though time is moving extra fast this afternoon. I looked up and realized it's 3:56. We have another 3 minutes to wrap up. We have hardly touched the subject, but I crave your indulgence. Be back with us next week. Now, but let's slip this in. I mean, there are a few questions that have come in. I'm going to say to those of you who have asked questions, if you did ask a question and you didn't get it answered, we haven't answered many of your questions this afternoon because time has just gone so quickly. Be sure to join us next week. We're going to try to continue this discussion and try to respond to all of your questions. I really wanted to touch the issue of the essential services, and we don't have time to go into all of that. So let's just answer one of the many questions that we have here. So somebody's asking, how is freedom of conscience significantly different from freedom of religion? Is it one and the same? Are they really, really different? And how are they different? This may be the only question we can respond to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if I should add, in our Constitution, reference is made to Section 4G, where it says that all citizens have the right to freedom of conscience. It means that a person must not or should not be held under duress, but that person should be free to choose or to decide what his or her religious affiliation or beliefs may be and how it should be observed.
So when we talk to freedom of conscience, is it, my take is that the freedom of conscience can include religion in terms of changing, but it is more expansive. So it alludes to other areas in addition to the religious perspective. Okay, and I see some nods there saying yes.
Sure.
Attorney Baker, you were saying?
No, I agree, Dr. Greene. I think that's exactly it. Freedom of conscience is a broader term and religion is more narrow under that. So conscience is the broad aspect of you being able to make decisions on your life based on what you believe to be correct and prudent and based on your morals, beliefs, ethics, whatever. And religion is, basically that you choosing to adhere to a specific moral code based on your religious practice, belief, and that all falls under freedom of conscience.
Mm-hmm. Should
I
add, yes, Dr. Greene and
sure,
and members of the panel, So when as church leaders, we present the gospel in the context of our 28 fundamental beliefs, this is where it is very important for us to allow persons of themselves, based on this whole concept of freedom of conscience, to decide for themselves without being forced, or coerced to make that decision to adhere to these fundamental beliefs.
A very important principle. That sounds like something we want to explore further on another discussion, but our time is up. I want to thank you three attorneys for joining us this afternoon, for giving of your time, and for entertaining this very significant discussion. We have not touched the matter of the essential services. We have not touched the matter of the questionable employment, or if, for example, I've had individuals asking me, is this job good for Seventh Adventists to do? Can I be allowed to work in this particular institution, knowing that they work on Saturdays, etc.? So we have quite a bit, and there is a line of questions that I see coming in here that we have to deal with next week. So I trust we will have next week. We'll be able to complete it next week. But thank you so much for sharing with us. I'm going to give you half a second. Our time is definitely up, but half a second just to say one final thing based on what we have shared this afternoon. If there is just one, no more than 30-second thought you want to leave with our viewers, you can go ahead and say it now. So we will go with West, then Samlalsingh, and then Baker.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. I just want to say this was a really enjoyable program, and I just want to endorse something that Council Baker said. Employees are empowered by the Constitution, they are empowered by the legislation, and therefore they can and have the right to enforce their right to choose, to enforce their right of not wanting or not desiring to work on the Sabbath because it is their religious belief and they wish to exercise their religious belief. And you may not always be successful in the courts, but you have the right to enforce it, you have the right to pursue it, and you should do so. You should always do so.
All right, thank you so much. Dr. Samlalsingh.
Yes, Dr. Greene and panelists. Let me say here that it's in this very environment in which we operate, where more and more we are seeing that people's rights are enshrined in the Constitution, the respective constitutions of the different regions or territories in the region. It is important that our members, especially our members, and all, of course, familiarize themselves with those rights and freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution. Generally, people think that only attorneys should know the law, but I think we have come to a time when everyone needs to know the law to some extent, and that will, help our employers and those who are responsible and who we relate with to be more circumspect in the way they relate to us as far as employment is concerned.
Thank you so much, very wise counsel. And finally, Attorney Baker.
Yes, and even more powerful than the Constitution, you have God on your side. Once you have made up your mind that this is what you want to do, this is what you believe, you stand by it. You may have rough times, you may go through troubled waters, but oftentimes it has been my personal experience and my experience dealing with persons who have had this issue, that they either come out better on the other end, or if they stay with that employer, they were able to somehow influence them in terms of their own religious beliefs. So stand by what you believe. God has your back as long as you're sincere with it, and worry about nothing.
Thank you so much. Very wise counsel. Thank you all three for sharing, and to our viewers. It was a delight discussing this special Let's Talk edition. We, as promised, will be back next week at 3 p.m. to continue what looks, from all indications, that it's going to be a really, really inspiring session. See you then, and may God